The cookbook was falling apart. Its spine had been taped twice, and the pages were stiff with lard and flour. It sat on a shelf above the stove in Greenville, Mississippi in 1983 in the kitchen of a 72-year-old woman who had never stepped foot inside a restaurant. Her grandmother had dictated those recipes from memory in 1921. Not one of them appears on any menu in America today. Number 12 survived in exactly one corner of the Deep South. Number 7 fed entire families through winters when the pantry held nothing but flour and lard. And number 3 will make most people alive today deeply uncomfortable. The food industry never banned these dishes. It just replaced them with things that came in boxes. Hit subscribe because here are 25 forgotten soul food recipes you could only find in old cookbooks. Number 25, crackling bread. Before cornbread became a sweetened side dish at brunch restaurants, it was built around cracklings, the crunchy pieces of rendered pork skin left after hog killing day. The oldest community cookbooks called for a full handful stirred straight into the cornmeal batter. When the bread came out of the oven, every bite cracked with salt and smoke and fat. No sugar, no wheat flour, just cornmeal, cracklings, buttermilk, and a hot oven. A woman in rural Georgia could feed 6 people on one pan of it using ingredients she already had. Most cornbread in grocery stores today is closer to yellow cake than anything those old cookbooks described. The cracklings and the patience it took to render them are what the frozen aisle decided nobody needed anymore. Number 24, tomato gravy. Across rural Alabama, the Carolinas, and most of Mississippi, breakfast meant biscuits, and biscuits meant gravy. But the gravy in the oldest church cookbooks was not the white sausage gravy sold in cans today. It was tomato gravy, bacon drippings, a spoon of flour, and home canned tomatoes from the summer garden, cooked thick and tangy in a skillet, then poured over split biscuits still warm from the oven. The color was dark red, almost brick. It stained the plate. Families who put up their own tomatoes ate this 4 mornings a week from August through March because the jars held in the pantry without refrigeration. Children who grew up eating it can still describe the exact color. When instant gravy powder arrived in the 1960s, tomato gravy quietly disappeared from most Southern tables before going any further. For those who want more of these old recipes, the dishes covered on this channel, and many that have not been, all collected in one place, Big Mama's Soul Food Kitchen, at my website, thehungryhistorian.com. It will not come up again in this video. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 23, poke salad. The plant grew wild along fence rows and ditches across the South, and in spring, when the pantry was at its emptiest, women went out with a bucket and picked the young leaves before they turned toxic. Poke salad had to be boiled 3 separate times. The water poured off between each boil because the mature plant is poisonous. The old cookbooks were specific about this. 3 waters, no shortcuts. After the 3rd boil, the greens were fried in bacon grease with scrambled eggs. It was bitter, earthy, and free. The dish showed up in community cookbooks from East Tennessee to the Alabama Black Belt, always with the same warning about the 3 boils. Skip 1 and you would know it. Wild food foraging is trendy now, but for black families in the rural South, it was Tuesday. Nobody called it foraging, they called it getting by. Number 22, leather britches. Every fall across Appalachia and the Upper South, green beans were threaded onto long strings with a needle and hung from porch rafters or kitchen ceiling beams to dry in the air. They hung there for weeks, shriveling into tough, leathery strips that looked like nothing you would want to eat. The cookbooks called them leather britches. When winter came, the dried beans were pulled down, soaked overnight, and simmered low with a ham hock or a piece of smoked side meat. After hours in the pot, they softened into something rich and deep with a concentrated flavor that fresh green beans could never match. The method came through the Caribbean and into the American South. Dehydration was preservation before refrigeration existed. The strings came down for good when chest freezers arrived. Number 21, sweet potato pone. This was not sweet potato pie and not sweet potato casserole. Sweet potato pone was older than both. The recipe appeared in handwritten church cookbooks from the 1880s across Georgia, Alabama, and the Mississippi Delta. Raw sweet potatoes were grated by hand on a box grater, mixed with molasses, butter, eggs, and spices, then baked slow until the top cracked and the center set dense and dark, almost like a pudding. It took close to 2 hours in a wood-fired oven. The texture was heavy, somewhere between cornbread and fudge, and it was eaten warm with nothing on top. Grating enough sweet potato for a family of 8 meant raw knuckles and sore arms. When canned sweet potatoes and pre-made pie crust showed up in stores in the 1950s, sweet potato pone was one of the first recipes to drop out of the rotation. Nobody noticed until the hands that grated them were gone. Number 20, Kush. Most people have never heard the word. Kush was yesterday's cornbread, crumbled into a skillet with a little bacon grease and fried until crispy on the outside. Some cookbooks added milk or buttermilk to the pan, turning it into a thick porridge. Others folded in diced onion. The Gullah Geechee version along the coast of South Carolina used crumbled cornbread with cane syrup and butter. Every version started with the same idea. Leftover cornbread was not waste. It was breakfast. In households where bread was baked every day and nothing was thrown out, Kush was the Monday morning answer to Sunday's extra pan. The name may trace back to couscous, carried from West Africa and adapted with the grains available here. By the 1970s, when sliced white bread and boxed cereal took over the morning table, Kush lost its reason to exist. Every recipe so far shares something in common. They required no trip to a store, no brand name, no packaging. Cracklings came from the hog you raised. Tomatoes came from the garden you kept. Poke grew in the ditch beside the road. Cornbread left over from last night became tomorrow's breakfast without anyone calling it a recipe. The entire system was built on what was already there, and that is exactly why the modern food industry had no use for it. You cannot sell a woman what she already grows, kills, preserves, and cooks from memory. The only way to replace her food was to make her children forget she ever knew how to make it. This is where the story reaches further back than the country itself. Number 19, hoe cake. The name was literal. Before the American Revolution, enslaved field workers cooked cornmeal batter on the flat blade of a garden hoe held over an open fire. There was no kitchen, no oven, no table. There was a tool meant for digging, repurposed for cooking, because it was the only flat piece of metal within reach. The earliest written references appear in Virginia plantation records from the 1700s, where overseers noted that enslaved people baked cakes on their hoes during midday breaks. By the early 1800s, hoe cake had migrated indoors. Cast iron griddles replaced the hoe blade, and the recipe appeared in nearly every Southern cookbook published before the Civil War. But the name stuck. Hoe cake, a word that carries inside it the full history of Black cooking in America, making something nourishing out of almost nothing, using tools that were never designed for the purpose. The batter itself was the simplest thing imaginable. Cornmeal, water, a pinch of salt, cooked flat until the edges brown. Some versions added a spoonful of lard. Some added buttermilk, but the original needed nothing more than meal, water, and heat. Abraham Lincoln reportedly ate hoe cakes as a child in Kentucky. Frederick Douglass wrote about them. The dish crossed every line of class and color in the antebellum South. And then it vanished. Not because it stopped tasting good, but because the name reminded people of something the country wanted to forget. The garden hoe hanging in the shed became just a garden tool again. The cake baked on it became just cornbread, and the people who invented it became a footnote in someone else's cookbook. Number 18, pepper vinegar. On nearly every table in the rural Black South, next to the salt shaker, sat a glass bottle filled with hot peppers and white vinegar. It showed up in community cookbooks, not as a recipe, but as a given, the way flour might appear. You packed small hot peppers into a bottle, covered them with vinegar, and let it sit on the counter for a week. The vinegar turned amber, then orange. A few drops went on collard greens, black-eyed peas, turnip greens, and anything else that needed heat. Nobody bought hot sauce when the pepper bottle was already there. When you ran low, you just added more vinegar and let it sit another few days. The bottle was never empty and never finished. When Tabasco and Louisiana brand hot sauce became cheap and everywhere in the 1970s, the homemade bottle slowly disappeared from the table. Number 17, watermelon rind preserves. The red flesh was eaten fresh. The rind was not thrown away. In old cookbooks from the Carolinas and Georgia, watermelon rind was peeled, cubed, soaked in lime water overnight to firm it up, then simmered for hours with sugar, lemon, and ginger until it turned translucent and sweet. The result was a clear, jewel-like preserve that tasted nothing like watermelon. Closer to candied ginger, delicate and strange, it kept in mason jars for a full year. Making it was an all-day job. The peeling alone took an hour, but it came from the part of the fruit that everyone else threw in the compost pile. In a kitchen where waste was not just frowned on, but genuinely could not be afforded, this preserve was an act of precision. Every part of the fruit had a purpose. Number 16, ash cake. Before there were ovens in most rural homes, there was fire. Ash cake was cornmeal dough shaped by hand, wrapped in dampened cabbage leaves or corn husks, and buried directly in the hot ashes of a hearth fire. It baked slowly from all sides. When it was pulled out and the leaves peeled away, the outside was dark and smoky, and the inside was dense and steaming. The method was ancient. Variations of it appear in cooking traditions across West Africa, the Caribbean, and the American South. The oldest plantation records mention ash cake as the primary bread of enslaved people before the 1830s. It required no pan, no oven, no fuel beyond the fire already burning for warmth. When cast iron became widely available after the Civil War, ash cake disappeared almost overnight. Number 15, Souse meat. After hog killing day, when the hams and shoulders had been salted and stored, what remained was the head. Souse meat was the answer. The hog head was simmered in a large pot with vinegar, onions, and hot peppers until the meat fell apart. The liquid cooled into a stiff gelatin that held the shredded meat in place. It was poured into loaf pans, chilled, and sliced cold. Some cookbooks called it head cheese. In Black households across the Deep South, it was simply part of the rhythm of winter. The hog was killed, the head was boiled, the souse was made. Sliced thin with crackers and pepper vinegar, it was one of the only cold meats available before refrigeration. The texture was firm and the gelatin visible, a window into another era's relationship with the animal. Today, it survives in a handful of country butcher shops in Mississippi and eastern North Carolina, and almost nowhere else. There is a pattern running through this list that deserves a name. Every recipe lost so far was lost the same way. Not by failure, not by taste, by convenience. A product appeared on a shelf. It was faster, it was wrapped in plastic, it came with instructions printed on the back, And the thing it replaced, the thing that took all day and required knowledge passed from hand to hand, simply stopped being worth the trouble to the next generation. Nobody made a decision to stop cooking. The recipes just drifted out of reach, one Thanksgiving at a time, one grandmother at a time, until the old cookbooks were the only place they still lived. Number 14, Neckbone perloo. Along the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, in the Low Country where African, Caribbean, and Southern food traditions mixed for 300 years, rice was the center of the plate. Perloo was the dish that made the least amount of meat feed the most people. Smoked pork neck bones were simmered in water with onion, garlic, and bay leaf until the broth was rich and the meat was tender enough to pull clean. Then raw rice was stirred directly into the pot and the lid sealed. The rice absorbed every trace of smoke and fat and salt. The word perloo likely comes from pilau, a technique that traveled through Persia and West Africa before arriving in the Low Country with enslaved people who already knew how to cook rice better than anyone on the continent. 2 or 3 neck bones, which cost almost nothing because nobody with money wanted them, could produce enough perloo to fill 8 or 10 plates. A single pot, 1 burner, rice that cooked in its own sauce. The Gullah Geechee communities along the Sea Islands kept this tradition alive longer than most, but by the 1990s, the old-style perloo was fading. Neck bones cost more now. The young people moved to Atlanta and Charlotte, and the rice that once grew in those same coastal fields has not been commercially harvested in South Carolina since the early 1900s. The old community cookbooks from Beaufort and Charleston recorded what the hands already knew: a cup of rice per person, enough broth to cover by 1 inch, and the patience to leave the lid alone. Number 13, molasses pulled candy. Sugar was expensive, molasses was not. The candy recipe that appeared most often in the old cookbooks was molasses pulled candy. Molasses boiled with a little vinegar and butter until it reached the hard, cracked stage, then pulled by hand while it cooled. Pulling was the work. 2 people stood across from each other, stretching the hot rope of candy until it turned from dark brown to pale gold. Children watched from the kitchen table. The pulling changed the texture from sticky to brittle, and when it cooled enough, it was cut into small pieces and wrapped in wax paper. The kitchen smelled like burnt sugar for the rest of the night. It was the only candy most rural Black children ever tasted outside of Christmas, and most of them remember the pulling more than the eating. Number 12, Jerusalem artichoke relish. The Jerusalem artichoke is not an artichoke and has nothing to do with Jerusalem. It is a sunflower root native to this continent, and it grew wild across the South in thick patches along creek beds and open fields. Black families in rural Mississippi and Alabama dug them up in autumn and turned them into relish, peeled, chopped fine, mixed with onion and green peppers, packed in vinegar and sugar, and canned in mason jars. The relish was sharp and crunchy, served alongside roasted meat or on top of field peas. The recipes appeared in handwritten community cookbooks from small Black churches in the Delta, passed around at church suppers, and preserved in collections that most libraries never cataloged. The tubers are still growing wild today. Nobody picks them anymore. Number 11, persimmon pudding. Wild persimmons grew across the South in small, bitter orange fruits that were inedible until the first frost softened them. Once ripe, they had a brief window before they rotted on the ground. The old cookbooks were precise. Pick after the frost, press the pulp through a sieve to remove the seeds, then mix it with flour, eggs, milk, and sugar into a thick batter. Baked low for over an hour, persimmon pudding came out dark and dense, somewhere between pumpkin pie and date cake. It was seasonal in the truest sense, available for a few weeks in late fall and then gone. Nobody sold persimmon pulp in a store. The fruit could not be shipped or stored. When families stopped walking the fence line in November looking for ripe fruit, this pudding went with them. Number 10, red rice. In the Gullah Geechee communities of coastal South Carolina, Georgia, and northern Florida, red rice was the dish that reached deepest into the past. Tomatoes, onion, and smoked meat were cooked down in a heavy pot until the mixture thickened. Then rice was stirred in, and the pot was left covered on low heat until every grain had absorbed the color and the flavor. The rice came out red. It was never white again. The dish descends directly from jollof rice, the one-pot tomato rice that spans West Africa from Senegal to Nigeria. Enslaved people brought the technique and adapted it with what they found along the Carolina coast. Red rice was served at funerals, reunions, Juneteenth celebrations, and church homecomings. It was one of the oldest unbroken lines between West African cooking and the American South. Today, it survives among Gullah Geechee families and in a small number of restaurants in Charleston and Savannah. The homemade tradition is fading fast. Number 9, Chow-chow. At the end of the growing season, whatever was left in the garden went into Chow-chow. Green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, peppers, sometimes corn cut from the cob. Everything was chopped fine, salted overnight, drained, then cooked in a spiced vinegar brine and packed into jars. The result was a tangy, crunchy relish that went on top of everything. Pinto beans, collard greens, roasted pork, cornbread. Making it was an end of summer ritual done in bulk, sometimes 30 or 40 jars at once. It lasted through winter and into spring. Every family believed their version was the right one, and arguments about whether to include corn or leave it out could last a generation. For people who still keep a garden, chow-chow is alive. For everyone else, it is a word they have never heard. Number 8, groundnut soup. The peanut arrived from South America and was carried to West Africa by Portuguese traders in the 1500s. When enslaved Africans were brought to the American South, they brought groundnut soup with them, a thick stew made from roasted peanuts, ground into paste, simmered with tomatoes, onions, and whatever meat was on hand. The oldest printed soul food cookbooks listed it under names like peanut soup or gooba soup. The flavor was rich and slightly sweet, with a thickness that came entirely from the nuts. It bore no resemblance to the peanut butter that became a children's lunch staple a century later. Groundnut soup was adult food, seasoned with hot pepper and served over rice, the most direct culinary line between the West African coast and the Black American table. When peanuts became a cheap snack and the word goober became a joke, the soup lost its dignity and its place at the table. Here is the one that fed families through entire winters. Number 7, buttermilk pie. The recipe called for 6 ingredients: flour, sugar, eggs, butter, buttermilk, and a pinch of nutmeg. That was it. No fruit, no chocolate, no cream, just the things already sitting in a farmhouse kitchen on any given day. Buttermilk pie appeared in handwritten cookbooks from Black communities across the South starting in the late 1800s. The filling was a simple custard poured into a homemade crust and baked until it set. The top browned and cracked slightly. The inside stayed smooth and tangy and sweet. What made buttermilk pie important was not its flavor. It was what the pie represented. When the pantry was bare, when the money had run out and the garden was frozen, and the hog had been eaten down to the bones, a woman could still make this. Buttermilk was the liquid left over from churning butter. Sugar was bought in bulk at the start of the year. Flour was always there. Eggs came from the yard. Every ingredient was already paid for or already present. The pie was proof that something could still come out of the oven when everything else was gone. It was not decorated. It sat on the counter on a Tuesday afternoon in February when nobody was coming over, and it meant that the kitchen was still working. Church cookbooks in Alabama and Mississippi printed the recipe so often that some collections had 3 or 4 versions, each submitted by a different woman, each nearly identical. Today, buttermilk pie survives in a few bakeries and farmhouse restaurants across the South. Most people under 50 have never heard of it. Number 6, Potlikker dumplings. When collard greens or turnip greens were cooked down with smoked meat, the liquid left in the pot was called potlikker. It was dark green, salty, rich with vitamins, and too valuable to pour down the drain. The old cookbooks treated it like a broth. Small rounds of biscuit dough were dropped directly into the simmering pot liquor and cooked with the lid on until they puffed up soft and tender. The dumplings soaked up the flavor of the greens and the smoke of the pork. This was a second meal built from the leavings of the first, and it cost no additional ingredients beyond flour and a little lard. For anyone with stiff hands, dumpling dough was forgiving. No kneading, just pinch it off and drop it in. Number 5, Blackberry acid. This was not juice and not wine. Blackberry acid was a vinegar-based drink made from wild blackberries, sugar, and apple cider vinegar, stirred together and left to sit in a jar for several days until it fermented slightly into a thick, tangy syrup. A spoonful was mixed into cold water and drunk on hot days. The old cookbooks also called it blackberry shrub. In Black communities across the South, it was the summer drink made from whatever berries grew along the fence line or the edge of the woods. The vinegar preserved it for months without refrigeration. The health food industry now sells similar drinks under the name shrubs, bottled and priced for a specialty market that does not know the same drink was free and sitting on the counter in rural Mississippi 100 years ago. Number 4, clabber. Before pasteurization changed the dairy industry, raw milk left on the counter did not spoil the way store-bought milk does today. It clabbered. It thickened it naturally into something close to yogurt, tangy and firm, held together by the bacteria still alive in the milk. Black families across the South ate clabber straight from the jar, sometimes with sugar or molasses drizzled on top. It appeared in cookbooks as an ingredient for cornbread, biscuits, and pancakes, valued for the same acid tang that made buttermilk useful in baking. The idea sounds alarming to anyone raised on pasteurized milk. Raw milk sitting on a counter sounds like a mistake, but clabber was one of the safest fermented foods in the old kitchen. It fed itself. It preserved itself. When pasteurization became standard, clabber became impossible to make with what the store sold. Number 3, opossum and sweet potatoes. This is the recipe that makes modern audiences flinch, and that reaction is part of the story. Opossum was one of the most widely eaten wild meats in the American South from the 1700s through the mid-1900s. In Black communities, it was hunted at night with dogs and lanterns, cleaned, soaked in salt water, and roasted whole in a pan surrounded by sweet potatoes. The old cookbooks are blunt about it. The animal was cooked with its head on, the fat rendered into the sweet potatoes as it roasted, and the meat was rich and strong flavored. Opossum suppers were community events. Churches held them. Families invited neighbors. It was not poverty food in the way outsiders later framed it. It was a tradition with its own rituals and its own season. The discomfort people feel today says more about what happened to the American relationship with wild game than it does about the dish itself. Opossum was protein that walked into the yard. Turning it into a roast surrounded by sweet potatoes was not desperation. It was knowledge. Number 2, Streakoline. The name described exactly what it was: a slab of salt-cured pork side meat with streaks of lean running through the fat. It was not bacon, it was not ham. It was the cheapest thing on the hog, too fatty for roasting and too salty for eating on its own. But in the old cookbooks, streakoline appeared on nearly every page, not as a main dish, but as a flavoring agent. A thin slice fried in a skillet rendered enough grease to cook a full meal. Greens, beans, corn, rice, eggs, and biscuit dough all started with a piece of streakoline in the bottom of the pan. It was the foundation ingredient of soul food cooking, the invisible base note under everything else. When vegetable oil became cheap and doctors said to stop cooking with animal fat, streakoline quietly disappeared from grocery shelves. The flavor it left behind in a pot of greens has never been matched by a bottle of oil. Number one is not a single recipe. It is the plate itself, the church supper plate. Every community cookbook in the old Black South was produced by a church. The recipes inside were submitted by the women of the congregation, handwritten on index cards, typed on borrowed typewriters, and bound with staples or string. Each recipe carried a name: Sister Johnson's peach cobbler, Deaconess Williams' cornbread dressing, Mother Davis's lemon pound cake. The cookbook was not a product, it was a census. It told you who was in the kitchen, what they made, and what they believed was worth writing down. The church supper plate held all 24 recipes that came before this one, served together on a Sunday afternoon in a fellowship hall with folding chairs and paper tablecloths. That plate is what the food industry could never package. Not the recipes, the gathering, the table. Somewhere in Greenville, Mississippi, a cookbook with a taped spine is still sitting on a shelf above a coal stove. The kitchen is quiet now, but the recipes are still in there. Time equals 1 second / greater. Number 18, smothered oxtails with onion. A heavy enamel Dutch oven on a coal range in 1947, Cleveland. 4 pounds of oxtails, dredged in flour, browned on every side. They wore a dark crust. The cook poured off most of the grease, added 2 yellow onions sliced thick, 3 cloves of garlic, a quart of beef broth from the bones the day before. She covered the pot, slid it to the back of the range, let it braise 4 hours while she did the wash. The oxtails came out fork tender. The gravy was the color of strong coffee. The onions had melted into the sauce. She served it over white rice with stewed collards and a wedge of cornbread fresh from the oven. The dish fed 6 for 35 cents in 1947. That was the whole bill. Your grandfather ate it on Sunday after church, the way his father had before him. It signaled your family had survived another week. Number 21, hot water cornbread. The hot water cornbread was the trick that separated grandmothers who could cook from those who only thought they could. Yellow cornmeal went into a wide bowl with a heavy shake of salt on top, and boiling water poured straight from the tea kettle while a wooden spoon stirred fast. The dough firmed up into a thick paste hot enough to burn your hand if you rushed it. Patties were shaped between 2 wet palms and dropped into ½ an inch of hot bacon grease in a heavy skillet. 2 minutes aside, crisp golden outside, steamy and soft inside. No oven, no rising time, no buttermilk needed, no eggs to spare. A working mother in Mississippi could put a stack of 6 on the table in under 15 minutes, alongside greens and beans and whatever scrap of pork was bubbling in the pot. Black grandmothers in the Mississippi Delta swore the trick was the tea kettle, not the cornmeal. Hot water cornbread was speed cooking before anybody invented the term. Number 21, hog maws. Few dishes test a cook's patience and a kitchen's cleanliness like the stomach of a hog. Hog maws are exactly that. The pig's stomach lining scraped and turned and scrubbed for hours before they ever hit the pot, often simmered right alongside chitterlings for a New Year's feast. They came down the same road as every other offcut handed to enslaved people because the owners would not eat them, then made into something prized through sheer skill. Because the cleaning was so long and so messy, public health officers grouped maws with the other raw pork innards that drove their 1960s urban sanitation drives, warning that careless handling could spread illness around the kitchen. Inspectors leaned on markets and home cooks alike to be cautious with raw hog parts and to scrub down every surface afterward. None of that kept the maws out of the holiday pot, where they simmered soft and savory beside the chitlins for hours. What the city called a hazard, the family called tradition. Number 15, ham hock and lima beans. A 2-pound bag of dried baby limas on the kitchen table in 1946 Mobile, soaked overnight with a teaspoon of baking soda. The cook drained them, rinsed them, dropped them into a Dutch oven with a smoked ham hock the butcher gave her free. She added a yellow onion stuck with 3 cloves, a bay leaf, enough water to cover by 2 inches. The pot simmered 4 hours while she ironed shirts. The hock came out. She stripped the meat, stirred it back in, salt last, so the beans stayed tender. She served it over white rice with a wedge of corn pone and a slice of raw onion. The dish fed 5 for 9 cents. That was the whole bill. It ran the family from Wednesday to Friday, and any week the paycheck came up short. Your grandmother kept the recipe in her head the way her ancestors had since the cotton fields. Number 19, liver and onions. By 1984, beef liver was selling for under $1 a pound at most black neighborhood grocery stores in cities like Cleveland and Baltimore, the cheapest cut sitting on the meat case. 2 large yellow onions were sliced thin and cooked low and slow in bacon grease until they turned the color of weak coffee and the kitchen filled with the sweet caramel smell. The liver was patted dry with paper towels, dusted in seasoned flour, heavy with black pepper, and dropped in the same skillet 3 minutes aside, no longer than that. Overcooking turned it to shoe leather, and every black grandmother had a daughter she had trained out of that mistake the hard way. Served with mashed potatoes and a tall glass of cold buttermilk, it was the iron-rich meal that doctors kept telling black families with anemia to eat more often. Liver and onions was medicine that tasted like supper. Number 24, fried chicken cooked in lard. Nothing said the preacher was coming to dinner like a skillet of chicken popping in a deep pool of hog lard. For generations, the fat of choice was lard, scooped from a tin and melted down until a dropped crumb sizzled and floated. The bird went in dredged and seasoned, and the lard gave that shattering, deep gold crust no vegetable oil could match. When the saturated fat campaigns picked up steam through the 1960s, lard became the villain of the cooking world, and health bulletins pushed families toward the new hydrogenated shortenings and bottled oils instead. Shortening makers leaned hard into that message, running ad after ad that framed lard as old-fashioned and bad for the heart. County nutrition columns echoed the same advice, telling readers to set the lard tin aside and pour from a bottle. Black cooks, who had fried in lard since slavery, knew the difference on the tongue and resisted the swap, since the new oils gave a paler, greasier crust and none of the deep flavor. Sunday chicken stayed in the lard pot in most kitchens, no matter what the leaflet said, and the platter still came out heaped and golden after church. The warning changed the label on the can, never the skillet on the stove. Number 24, hoe cakes with sorghum molasses, a black iron griddle on a kerosene stove in 1944 Tuskegee, smoking hot, bacon grease pooled in the center. The batter was cornmeal, salt, hot water, nothing else. She dropped it by spoonful, 3 at a time, waited for the edges to lace, flipped each round. Each cake came off the size of a saucer. Crisp brown skirt, soft yellow heart. The sorghum sat in a tan pitcher on the table, slow and dark as tar. A child got 2 and was full. A working man got 6 and was satisfied. Your grandmother made these the way her mother had during the Depression. A sack of cornmeal lasted you a family 2 weeks. The supper cost 8 cents in 1944. Number 24, pinto beans and ham hocks. Open the bag of dried pinto beans and you're looking at the cornerstone of the 1980s soul food pantry. A pound sold for 50 cents at the Piggly Wiggly, and a single smoked ham hock cost less than $1.50. Soak the beans overnight in a cold pot of water. The next morning, drain them, add the hock, cover with fresh water, and let it bubble all afternoon. The pork fat melted into the broth and turned plain beans into something that tasted like Sunday. Grandmothers in Birmingham and Memphis kept this pot going on the back burner from Monday through Wednesday, adding water as it cooked down. Served over rice with a slice of raw onion on the side, it fed 4 working adults for under $3. Church kitchens used the same trick for fellowship suppers, doubling the recipe in a stock pot the size of a car battery. Pinto beans were the workhorse of every black kitchen that survived the Reagan years. Number 23, crackling cornbread. This was cornbread with the gift of the hog baked right into it. Cracklings are the crisp little bits of pork skin and fat left over after rendering lard, salty and crunchy, and folding a handful into the cornmeal batter turned plain bread into something a family fought over. It was thrift-made delicious. Every scrap of the pig used, nothing wasted, a habit carried straight out of slave quarter kitchens where the offcuts were all anybody got. Then came the 1960s and the rising concern over saturated fat in the new heart studies, and cracklings were exactly the kind of pork fat indulgence the new guidance frowned on. After the American Heart Association issued its first warning on saturated fat, public health writers of the era began naming lard-rich breads among the foods to cut back on for the sake of the heart. Some county leaflets even printed cornbread recipes stripped of the cracklings. But crackling cornbread was a holiday on a plate, the crunch of the pork skin against the soft crumb, and nobody was giving that up over a pamphlet. It went on getting baked in the same black skillet and carried hot to the table. The officials counted the grease while the family counted the slices. Number 13, skillet cornbread with cracklings. A 12-inch cast iron skillet on a wood stove in 1942 Tuskegee. Heated until a drop of water danced across the surface. The cook rendered a half pound of pork fat into golden cracklings the day before. Set them in a tin on the back of the stove. The batter was 2 cups yellow cornmeal, 1 egg, a cup of buttermilk, a teaspoon of soda. The cracklings folded in last. She poured a tablespoon of bacon grease into the hot skillet, swirled it around the sides, dropped the batter in with a hiss that brought the children in from the yard. The cornbread baked 20 minutes, came out with a brown crust thick enough to crack with a spoon. It fed 6 for 7 cents, eaten standing at the stove with a glass of cold milk. That was supper. Your grandmother kept hers in a Maxwell House tin she had saved since the war. Every kitchen in your town kept cracklings on the back of the stove. By 1985, the cracklings came in a bag from the gas station and the cornbread came from a box. You wouldn't know to ask for the real thing. Number 17, spaghetti with ground beef. Stretch 1 pound of ground chuck across 5 hungry mouths, and you have the math problem every working black mother solved every Thursday night in 1986. Half a pound of meat browned in a heavy pot with chopped yellow onion and green bell pepper. The grease drained off into an empty coffee can on the back of the stove. Then a can of generic store brand tomato sauce, a can of stewed tomatoes, a teaspoon of sugar to cut the acid, garlic powder, dried oregano if you had it on the spice rack, salt and pepper to taste. The sauce simmered low for 30 minutes while the cheap, thin spaghetti noodles boiled in a separate pot of salted water. A working mother of 3 in Cleveland could put this plate on the table in under 25 minutes flat after walking in from her second shift. With a slice of buttered white bread and a tall glass of red Kool-Aid, the whole supper came in under $3. Spaghetti night fed the family of 5 for under $3, exactly as your grandmother always promised it would. Number 22, smothered pork chops. Smothering was the art of taking a tough, cheap chop and drowning it in gravy until it surrendered. The chops were browned in lard, then left to simmer low under a thick roux gravy built from the pan drippings and flour until the meat fell soft and the gravy ran rich and brown over the rice. It was a way to make a hard cut tender and a small portion feel like plenty, a survival skill passed down through hard times. When the saturated fat warnings spread in the 1960s, that lard and drippings gravy was precisely the cooking style the New Heart guidance flagged, all that rendered pork fat thickened and poured over everything on the plate. County home economists sometimes urged families to skim the fat or skip the gravy altogether. The kitchen heard the advice and kept the spoon in the skillet. They tried to thin the gravy down, but the family kept it thick. Number 22, pig feet jelly with hot vinegar. A glass mason jar on the back porch shelf in 1945 Charleston, packed with split pig feet, water, salt, bay leaf, and 3 cloves of garlic. She simmered the feet for 6 hours. The meat fell off. The broth turned the color of weak tea. She strained it, pressed the meat into the jar, let the natural collagen do the work. By morning, the whole thing had set into a pale amber jelly. She sliced it cold for supper, served it with hot pepper vinegar in a thin saucer, a stack of saltine crackers on the side. A man came in from the field, ate half the jar, asked for more. The dish needed no icebox in winter. Your grandmother could feed a working man on what the white grocer threw away. That was the genius of her Depression kitchen. You wouldn't think a foot could become supper, but it could. Number 25, smothered neck bones. The neck bone was the cheapest pork on the meat counter in 1982, and black grandmothers knew it better than the butcher behind the case did. A pound went for under $1 in most southern grocery stores, and one 3-pound package fed a household of 6 on a Sunday if you stretched it right. The bones went into a heavy pot with chopped onion, garlic powder, a splash of cider vinegar, a bay leaf, and water enough to cover by an inch. 2 hours of low simmering pulled the marrow into the gravy, and the meat slid off the bone with the gentle pull of a fork. Working mothers in Detroit and Atlanta put this pot on before church on Sunday morning and came home at noon to dinner already made and waiting. A scoop of long-grain white rice underneath caught the gravy, and a slice of soft white bread mopped the plate clean at the end. The neck bone was poor man's meat with rich man's flavor. Number 20, pig feet. Slow simmered until the skin went to silk and the bones gave up their richness. Pig feet were a poor table's luxury. They were boiled for hours with vinegar and pepper, sometimes pickled in a jar and eaten cold, sometimes served hot and falling apart over rice. Like so much of soul food, the feet were an offcut the enslaved were left with and turned into something worth waiting all day for. They carried the same official suspicion as the other raw pork parts during the 1960s sanitation campaigns, since handling fresh trotters meant handling raw hog that could carry bacteria into the kitchen. Health departments of the era pressed the message of careful cleaning and thorough cooking for all such cuts, the same drumbeat aimed at chitlins and maws. Cooks already knew to boil the feet long and hard until the meat all but melted and they kept right on doing it. The warnings worried about the bacteria, but the pot kept its promise. Number 16, liver and gravy over rice. A pound of beef liver on the butcher's paper in 1945 New Orleans. Deep purple, dressed in flour. She sliced it thin, dredged each piece, seared it in bacon drippings 2 minutes aside. The outside browned, the inside stayed pink. The liver came out, 3 sliced onions went in, sweated soft, caramel color. The kitchen smelled sweet enough to bring the children in from the yard. She made the gravy in the same pan with the fawn, a tablespoon of flour, and a cup of water from the rice pot. The whole supper went over a plate of long, grain Carolina rice. It cost 12 cents and fed 4. Your grandmother served it once a week the way her mother had during the Depression. Liver was a Wednesday staple in every working kitchen. By 1973, liver had become a punishment children whispered about on the school bus. The dish vanished. Number 18, salmon croquettes. But salmon was canned, not fresh, and that was the whole point of the recipe. A 14-ounce tin of pink salmon from the Piggly Wiggly sat at $1.20 in 1985, and one can feed a family of 4 when stretched correctly with the right binder. The fish was flaked into a wide mixing bowl, bones and all, mixed with yellow cornmeal, a beaten egg, finely chopped onion, a shake of Old Bay, and a dash of cracked black pepper. The bones were soft enough to mash with a fork and added a quiet dose of calcium that nobody talked about, but every grandmother knew about. Patties were shaped by hand, flattened to the thickness of a deck of cards, fried in hot oil until the crust turned mahogany brown, served with grits and grape jelly in the morning or rice and brown gravy in the evening. The croquette was the black southern dish that traveled north during the Great Migration and stayed on the Sunday breakfast table. Salmon croquettes were the Depression recipe that outlived the Depression. Number 25, salt pork and cabbage pot. A blue speckled enamel pot on a wood range in 1943 Birmingham. 3/4 full of water, 1 head of cabbage chopped rough, a piece of salt pork the size of a child's fist. The cook cut the rind into a cross so the fat would render slow. By the time the cabbage went limp, the pork had given up enough grease to coat every leaf. The kitchen smelled the vinegar from the porch jar she kept by the door. 4 ingredients, 1 fire, a wooden spoon worn smooth from 20 years of use. None of it was banned by law. The supermarket just stopped stocking the rind by 1972. She served it with a wedge of corn pone and a glass of cold buttermilk on the side. Your grandmother knew the dish by smell. Her grandmother had cooked it through the Depression. You have never tasted it. Your kitchen does not even keep the pot anymore. And those were 25 forgotten soul food recipes that lived inside old cookbooks and nowhere else. Some of them are still possible to make today. The cracklings, the pepper vinegar, the buttermilk pie. Try one this week and see what comes back. Drop in the comments the one your family made best. The recipe that never got written down because your grandmother refused to measure a single thing. Name the dish, name the woman. That is how a cookbook gets started.